Now, before we even get started, I do want to remind everyone that new parts of the story should be up every Tuesday until the story is done. As for how many parts there will be in total, well, also as usual, I'm not entirely sure, though I don't anticipate this being a rather long series. As for those of you hoping I would be following up my previous story, The Lost Jedi, with my version of episode 9 now, well, that will almost certainly be my next story after this one. And now, without further ado, let's start this story. You find yourself watching Return of the Jedi, and have gotten to the part where the Ewoks have agreed to help the rebellion forces destroy the shield generator. And as usual, while Han is instructing 3PO to get their weapons back from the Ewoks, among other things, we watch as Luke slips out during the confusion of the celebration, followed soon after by Leia. And that's when, also as usual, Luke asks Leia if she remembers her mother, her real mother, and Leia tells him that she does, but just a little bit, and that it's mostly images and feelings. Luke tells Leia he has no memory of his mother, that he never knew her, and then proceeds to tell Leia that Vader is here, now, on this moon, and that he's come for him, and that's why he has to go. And it's at this moment that something different happens, and instead of Luke going on to tell Leia that she is his sister, Leia instead takes hold of Luke by his arms, and with a pleading look upon her face says to him, "No, you can't leave us now. You can't. We need you here, Luke, not just because of your abilities, but because of the hope you represent. If you leave us now, the others won't understand. All these men and women ready to follow the last Jedi into battle won't understand why you're leaving us in our most desperate hour." Luke then gives her a sympathetic, understanding smile and says, "Leia, you don't understand." But before he can go on, Leia again interrupts and says, "And I never will, Luke. I'm not a Jedi. I don't have your powers, and honestly, I'm glad I don't." To that, Luke almost looks hurt, and he begins, "But Leia." "No, Luke," she interrupts again. "It's you who doesn't understand. I can't explain it, but I've always felt like we found each other for a reason, that together we were destined to lead the rebellion to victory, that you would be the mythical symbol of hope, a Jedi rising from the ashes of old to inspire us, while I could be something else. I could show everyone that we can all fight against the tyranny of the Empire. Even a once stuck-up princess from Alderaan could do their part and make a difference." Luke then shuts his eyes and takes in a deep breath, and while doing this, we see Leia looking at him with both hope and concern on her face. Finally, Luke's eyes again open, and he says, "I'll stay, Leia. I'll stay and help in this fight, but Vader is here, and he will come for me. And if I can't turn him back to the light, he will destroy me, and if he does..." Leia looks like she's about to interrupt him, but Luke doesn't let her this time, and he says, "If he does, Leia, you will be the only hope for the galaxy." Leia seems to contemplate that for a long moment, but doesn't seem to fully understand it, but nods her head nonetheless, and the scene ends. Which is when we then get a quick shot of the sun rising over the forest moon of Endor, before we're taken inside the Imperial complex on Endor, and see Darth Vader, hands locked behind his back, pacing back and forth down a windowed corridor, when suddenly the first rays of sunlight come streaming through the windows, which is when Vader stops his pacing and moves towards the window and simply stares out. Soon after, a door at the end of the corridor opens, and an Imperial officer marches up to Vader, swallows nervously and says, "My lord, all scout teams have reported in. No further signs of rebel activity." For a very long moment, there is silence, other than Vader's mechanical breathing. Finally, Vader says, "Have your men continue to search until they have found something, Commander. He is here." And with those words, Vader quickly turns and marches away down the corridor. And it isn't long till we find that Vader is now in a relatively small, dimly lit room, when he falls to a knee just as a shimmering blue image of the Emperor appears before him. Vader then says, his head now bowed, "My master, Skywalker, has yet to reveal himself to me." The Emperor then replies, "Patience, my old friend. Either the son of Skywalker will come to you, or your feelings on this matter have been unclear, as I have foreseen. And he is not on the forest moon." Vader replies, "He is here, my master. I sense his presence, and he no doubt senses mine." Palpatine leans forward a bit and says, "And I have sensed nothing, and as I am a master of shadows, I fail to believe Skywalker would have the ability to veil himself from me." Vader raises his head slightly and then says almost hesitantly, Perhaps another aids him, my master, and hides him from you. The expression on Palpatine's face instantly darkens, and the bluish image of him leans ever closer to Vader. And moments later, we hear Vader's mechanical breathing become wheezy and difficult, and Vader uselessly raises one of his hands towards his throat while using the other to steady himself and keep from falling over. Careful, my apprentice, Palpatine begins. You would be wise to remember there is no power in the galaxy greater than me, and there never will be. With that said, the hologram of Palpatine fades away, and Vader's breathing returns to normal. And while still upon his knees, we see Vader ball up one of his hands into a fist, and as he does, everything in the room slowly begins to tremble. We then watch a series of very familiar scenes. We watch as the Ewoks show the rebels the back door to the shield generator. We watch as Han tricks a scout trooper into a trap to get the bunker door open. And we watch as the rebels inside the generator begin to plant charges and hear Leia tell them to hurry, that the fleet will be here any moment. And that's of course when the Imperials arrive and catch and stop the rebels after a quick scuffle. We then watch as an Imperial officer points a blaster at Han and calls him rebel scum. But this is again when something unexpected happens, and we hear the sound of a lightsaber igniting. From the shadows, wielding his green lightsaber, we then see Luke Skywalker emerge, and he quickly raises a hand and force pulls the blaster away from the officer. The other Imperials with him then turn their attention to Luke and begin to fire, but Luke deflects their blaster bolts with his lightsaber, sending some back at those firing. And also in the chaos, the other rebels take up their weapons again and fire upon the Imperials, and in no time, eliminate all of them. So much for this being a surprise, Han then mutters, and Chewie roars in agreement. Leia thinks for a moment, then says, plant the rest of the charges and let's find another way out of here. No doubt they've got our exit blocked. Han then chimes in, and likely any and all other exits. Leia then looks at Luke, gives a faint smile and says, well, if that's the case, then it's a good thing we have a Jedi with us, isn't it? Instead of giving any type of smile back, Luke just looks away and seems to sigh softly. He then pulls from his belt a communicator, and we hear him ask 3PO what the status outside is, and quickly learn almost everyone else has been captured. Luke then asks 3PO to kindly ask his furry devout followers to help if they can and create at least some type of distraction, to which C-3PO says he'll see what he can do. We then switch scenes and find ourselves back in the Imperial complex, where we see the same officer from before again go up to Vader, and this time he says, my lord, the shield generator is under attack. The Special Legion the Emperor dispatched has captured most of them, but it seems the indigenous creatures are helping the rebels. We also have reports that indicate some of the rebels are inside the generator, and that the Jedi may be with them. Vader then raises his hand, points at the officer as he says, deploy all your men, Commander. Their priority is to locate the Jedi and give his location to me. Do not fail me in this. The commander blinks in confusion, swallows back some fear and says, my lord, should their top priority not be the defense of the shield generator? Vader quickly replies, no, Commander. Their only concern is to find the Jedi. The commander nods and simply says, of course, my lord, before turning and marching away. Vader then stands there for a long moment, seemingly in thought or concentrating on something, before suddenly turning and marching away with purpose in his steps. We then switch scenes and watch as our rebel heroes run through the corridors of the shield generator and see that Luke is again holding the small communicator and talking to 3PO, and we hear him say, that's great that our little furry friends have agreed to help, but as soon as we're clear we're going to blow the charges before the Empire can locate them. You need to do your best to get anyone and everyone you can clear of the blast. The scene then shifts, and we're now outside and in the forest and see 3PO holding the communicator while all around him we hear and see the battle is taking place between the Empire and the rebels and their Ewok allies. 3PO then says, yes, well, that may be difficult, Master Luke, but I will see what I can do. Just do whatever you can, Luke then replies, as the scene shifts back to him and the others running through the corridors. We then hear Han, who is leading the group as they run, say, if these schematics we pulled up on the computer are correct, there should be another exit right around this next corner. And no sooner does he say that, but they turn the corner and run right into a small group of stormtroopers. For a moment, both sides freeze, and before anyone else can do anything, Luke quickly raises a hand and force pushes the troopers into the walls of the corridor. Han then glances at Luke and gives him an approving nod, and then he looks at the troopers who litter the corridor in front of them, and they are either completely incapacitated or rolling around on the ground moaning in pain as they try to get their wits about them. Han then seems to be about to say something, but Luke quickly says first, just leave them as is. With any luck, some will get out and clear off the blast. Han gives a look to Luke like he's crazy and simply says, but they're stormtroopers. To that, Luke nods and says, at the moment they are, but with any luck, this will be one of the final days of the Empire, and perhaps then they can go on to be something else. Han says nothing to that, and just gives Luke a unreadable expression that seems half like a smirk and half like a frown, before running off down the corridor, taking care to leap over the bodies of the fallen troopers. And soon enough, we watch as our heroes emerge into the forest through another exit, similar to the one they first entered. And surprisingly enough, they encounter no Imperials, though they can hear the sounds of battle far off in the distance. They run a bit further into the forest, take cover, and Luke tells 3PO over the comm that they're destroying the shield generator now, and that he should find cover. That's when the scene shifts, and we see the massive explosion as the shield generator is destroyed, before we're back with our heroes and see Leia check something like a watch on her wrist before saying, perfect timing, they were apparently using the shield generator to also jam us and the fleet, which has just arrived moments ago. Han gives a grim smile and then says, well, now it's up to Lando to not get my ship blown up and destroy that thing. He finishes by glancing up where the Death Star can be seen like a small moon up in the sky. Out of nowhere then, Luke says as he looks off at nothing in particular, they're going to do it. They're going to destroy it, and the Emperor along with it. Leia and Han exchange a look, and Leia then says as she lays a hand on Luke's shoulder, come on, let's see what we can do to help the rest of our strike force, and our new little friends. But Luke shakes his head and says, I'm sorry, Leia, but one way or the other, I must confront Vader. So this is where we part ways, for now. Leia then fiercely shakes her head and says, no, we won't leave you to fight that monster alone. But Luke quickly says back, I have no intention to fight him. I plan on saving him. We then see Han and Chewie exchange skeptical, confused looks before Leia says, but you can't really believe he can be saved. Luke gives a simple shrug and says, I have to believe he can be saved, for even if I wanted to destroy him, I lack the power to do so. Leia then shuts her eyes and lowers her head, and it's then that Luke looks to Han and gives him a nod of the head, and Han moves forward and gently pulls Leia away from Luke. Without another word, Luke then turns and walks off into the forest, and Han wraps Leia in an embrace as Chewie lets out a sad type of roar that is perhaps some form of goodbye. We then switch scenes and are briefly taken into space above the forest moon of Endor, and hear Lando comment about how Han and his team have incredible timing, and they've taken down the shield just as they've arrived, as planned, to preserve the surprise attack. And then we watch as several squadrons of fighters, led by the Millennium Falcon, make their way towards the Death Star. Before we switch scenes and find ourselves back on Endor, and now see Darth Vader standing at the edge of a bluff that overlooks the burning remains of the once massive shield generator, we then hear him say, the Emperor said you would be foolish enough to seek me out. And that's when we see, emerging from the thick foliage behind Vader, Luke, who then says, is it foolish to try to save one's own father? Vader doesn't turn to face Luke, but instead says, so, you have accepted one truth, that the man I once was is your father, but deny yourself another, that the power of the dark side is absolute, and that he cannot be saved. Luke shakes his head and takes a few steps towards Vader, until he's but a few paces behind him, and then he says, I feel the conflict in you, the fight between Anakin and Vader. I feel regret, a desire to make things right. Vader then says, there is no conflict, no regret, and I will make things right. I will destroy the rebellion and restore order to the galaxy. Finally, Vader turns and he extends a hand towards Luke and says, and with you by my side, my son, no power could ever challenge us. Together, we could destroy the Emperor and rule this galaxy. For one fleeting moment, and just a moment, Luke looks at the hand being offered him and almost seems to consider it. He then lets out a long, slow sigh, shakes his head and says, I would never turn to the dark side. Never. Vader lowers his extended hand and simply replies, and I could never turn back from it. Luke then takes another quick step forward, shaking his head as he says, no, Father, I could help you come back to the light. I know I could. It's then Luke who extends a hand to Vader, who briefly looks at it before hanging his head ever so slightly and saying, "You simply do not understand the power of the dark side. I must obey my master and serve him until I eclipse his power and destroy him." Luke takes yet another step forward, glances up at the Death Star in the sky and says, "Soon your master will be dead, his hold over you ended. I know, I can feel it. Soon you will be free of him." Vader is silent for a long moment. He then turns and again looks upon the burning remains of the shield generator as he says, "If what you say is true, then perhaps I won't have much use for you after all." With surprising speed, Vader takes hold of his saber, ignites it, and turns and swings at Luke, who barely activates his own saber just in time to block the attack. Vader takes a few more swings at Luke, who again blocks, which is when Luke quickly begins to backpedal towards the thick foliage. Vader tries to follow, but thanks in large part to his bulky suit, he has a very hard time negotiating the underbrush and low-hanging branches, and is forced to use his saber to hack his way through, all the while Luke is easily able to keep his distance. Luke then calls out, "I will not fight you, Father." Vader replies, "It matters not. You will meet your destiny this day all the same." "No, Father," Luke replies. "Today is the day you free yourself from the dark side and become the man you once were." Just then, there is a blinding flash of light, and we see both Vader and Luke look up into the sky, and through the forest canopy, they can just make out that the Death Star has been destroyed. We then see a small, triumphant smile form upon Luke's face as he says, "You feel it, don't you, Father? Your master is gone. You're free." We then focus back in on Vader, and for a few long seconds, he continues to stare up through the canopy at the ball of flames in the sky that was the Death Star. He then looks down and almost seems to give a sigh of relief. We then watch as he raises a hand and makes a fist and says, "I am more than just free." And as soon as he finishes saying that, he opens his hand and a wave of energy is unleashed from his body that spreads out in every direction and decimates most of the underbrush and smaller trees in his proximity. That's when we focus back in on Luke, who is now a bit bloodied and has to unbury himself from some of the debris caused by Vader's force blast. He then says as he gets to unsteady feet, "Father, don't do this. Don't give in to it. You must fight the dark side. Turn from its path." Vader then starts to walk in Luke's direction, most of the obstructions now cleared. He then says, "I gave into the dark side a long time ago, my son. Nothing can change that. Nothing can turn me from the dark path. And now I will destroy you, and soon enough your rebellion." When Luke hears that, his eyes shut and his head lowers. With apparent reluctance, he pulls his lightsaber to him after having dropped it in the blast, and ignites it once more. He takes a defensive stance, and with grim determination upon his face, looks at Vader, who approaches him, red saber still ignited. Vader then says, "How quickly you lose your faith in me, my son." Luke shakes his head and says, "No, I have faced my last test, and now stand before you as a Jedi. And as a Jedi, I will do what I must." It's then that Vader hesitates for a moment, and we focus in on his face and hear the voice of Obi-Wan Kenobi in his mind say the very same thing Luke just said. "I shall do what I must." Literally trying to shake it away with a quick shake of the head, Vader again strides towards Luke when he hears another voice, the voice of Qui-Gon Jinn, call out his name, which is immediately followed by another voice still, the voice of Ahsoka saying, "I won't leave you." This causes Vader to stop altogether, and Luke then looks upon Vader curiously and says, "Father?" But hearing that word seems to enrage Vader, and he quickly closes the gap between himself and Luke and begins to viciously attack Luke with one powerful swing after another. And it takes all Luke has not only to block the attacks, but to withstand the power behind them and keep hold of his saber and maintain his balance. After several such attacks, Luke looks exhausted and can take no more, and his defenses fail. He shuts his eyes just as Vader raises his saber over his head to finish him off. But it's then that we again focus in on the face of Vader and hear another voice in his mind. And this time it's Padme, and she says, "Come back, I love you." This causes Vader to once again hesitate, and Luke takes the opportunity to instinctively raise his saber and plunge it through Vader's stomach. And for a very long moment, Luke's saber remains there, and Luke, the expression on his face horrified, looks back and forth a few times between Vader's masked face, to his hands holding the saber that he has apparently just killed his father with. Finally, he deactivates the saber and Vader slumps to the ground. On Luke's face, we can see he's searching for the words to say, but cannot find them. It seems like he's about to crouch at Vader's side when we suddenly hear the sound of blaster fire and see a blaster bolt fly through the air and strike Luke in the shoulder. Quickly, Luke again activates his saber, and just in time to block several more well-aimed blaster bolts, though we see Luke grimace as he does because of the wound to his shoulder. We then see 3 Imperials emerge from the trees, wearing black outfits much like a TIE fighter pilot would wear, only with red accents. Another bolt then hits Luke in the thigh, and the 3 Imperials draw ever closer. Luke then takes a moment to look back and forth between the approaching trio of clearly well-trained Imperials and his father, who simply looks up at him wordlessly. It's only after Luke barely deflects another blaster bolt, which still grazes him on the shoulder, the same one that's already been hit, that he quickly retreats into the forest, pausing only long enough to give his father one last look. Once gone then, the 3 Imperials move to Vader's side, and one of them, in a female voice, says, "We're Inferno Squadron, sir. We're going to get you out of here. You and the Empire will live to fight another day." And that is where this part ends. Well, that's all I've got for you this time. Now it's your turn to tell me what you thought of this part of the story and what you think might happen next. So leave a comment below and let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.